significant because we are now embarking on implementing the South African National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security. We are here not to just tell you about the NAP, but to use the occasion to show our solidarity with women in conflict areas. Our NAP calls on us to do so. We have done so in the past, we are doing so in the present, and we will do so in the future. As women, we stand for peace, and we all seek ways to move processes forward through pathways that enable peace building. Today, we will also uncover the impact of conflict on women and the different roles that women occupy during conflicts, to reaffirm the need for peaceful resolution of conflict, to discern more concretely how we can support women in conflict areas, and to strengthen the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda and our NAP in particular. We may have taken very long to produce our National Action Plan. 11 years has been a long journey. Many of you have been on that journey. But we have, I think, a very substantive NAP, and we are certainly going to make sure that it is not another document just gathering dust. So you all have a copy of the actual National Action Plan, and you have a copy of the summary of that National Action Plan. We thank the donors and gender activists and government officials who made the development of our National Action Plan a reality, and those who are assisting us with popularizing it and implementing it. And we invite many more others to join us in this endeavor so that we can bring about change and greater peace and security for all women, not only in South Africa, but all women in all their diversity and in the many different locations where they are besieged by war. This International Month was marred by the armed conflict raging in Europe between Russia and Ukraine. We have seen the suffering of women there beamed into our living rooms, much like we have seen in Ethiopia and Sudan and Syria and Palestine and Western Sahara and many other countries. War always takes its toll on the vulnerable, on women and children. They are displaced, losing everything, including their husbands, fathers, brothers, material possessions, and their dignity. Sexual violence has been and remains an integral part of the conflict context. As peace builders, we have to call on all wars to find peaceful resolution. The carnage must end. The rape of our mothers, our daughters, our sisters, our children, and yes, our brothers too, must end. We as women must be at the forefront of calling for peace in all its dimensions, and we must be included into peace processes too. Include us in the mediation teams and as special envoys and as negotiators. Employ us as peace agents. We have been training, advocating, and engaging in this for years. We are ready. We have the capacity to make change possible. We will listen today to how conflict has impacted women, but we will also hear on how we can further support each other to be the change that we want to see. This solidarity meeting has been convened by a number of stakeholders who have been part of the development of the National Action Plan and are now part of its implementation. In particular, I'll mention our government as represented by DIRCO and here today by Charlotte Globe, who has spearheaded the process for DIRCO, and by Gertrude Chopper Women's Mediation Network, located in DIRCO, the SANDF, the Department of Women, People, and Persons with Disabilities, and by UN Women, with the support of Norway, who carried us through much of our journey of the development of the NAP, organizations such as Accord, who have done a lot of the training and supporting of women in Africa, by the Foundation for Human Rights, who convened civil society when we were drafting the NAP, now by IGR, Sawi Urisa, the Foundation for Human Rights, Lopeco, Access Chapter 2, with generous support from Ireland, and we trust also from the Netherlands and UN Women, for hosting these kinds of engagement and for taking us through the implementation of the NAP, making that also possible. We are certainly hoping many others, and we know, will come on board. We are hoping to come out of this meeting having recommitted ourselves to the Women, Peace and Security agenda. An agenda, I think, that is not separate from the main peace and security agenda. One that is a key part of creating and sustaining peace and security globally. Our impact is in making our voices heard. Our impact is in our solidarity with each other, and our impact is in doing what is necessary to bring about peace. We pulled this meeting together in less than a week, as we did with the July unrest. That is to show that when we work together, we are stronger and we go further. So let us then, without further ado, begin today's program with some opening remarks. We will first have a message, a video message by the Honorable Candith Mashego-Dlamini. The Honorable Minister has also previously served as MEC for various departments of the Mpumalanga Provincial Government. She has also been Treasurer of the ANC Women's League and served as Deputy Secretary of the Commonwealth Women's Parliamentary Association, the Mpumalanga branch. We will now hear that message. Thank you.
Program Director, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. My greetings to Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, former Deputy President and former UN Women Executive Director, now Global Co-Convener of the African Women's Leadership Network, Madam Panita Diop, Special Envoy on Women, Peace and Security, African Union, Honorable Pinky Kekane, Deputy Minister in the Presidency in South Africa, Your Excellency Fionnuala Gilsenan, Ambassador of Ireland to South Africa, distinguished leaders and members of the civil society organization present here, among others are the conveners of this dialogue, African Women Leadership Network, South African Women in Dialogue, Human Rights Institute of South Africa, Lady of Peace, Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, Accord, and the Gertrude Shopper Women Mediation Network. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me an honor to address you this morning as we continue to celebrate International Women's Day on the 8th of March. The day always marks a call to action for gender equality and women's rights, and to commemorate the cultural, political, and socio-economic achievement of women. We now use the month of March to focus on issues affecting women, such as those of women in conflict areas. It was the delegates at the 1910 International Socialist Women's Conference who proposed that we have a special Women's Day. It was, however, only after women gained the vote in Soviet Russia in 1917 that it was made a national holiday. The United Nations adopted the day in 1975, and we all now celebrate the month. Today, these dialogues seek to commemorate International Women's Month through showing solidarity with women in conflict areas. South Africa launched its National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security in March 2021. The NAP calls on South Africans to continue with its long-standing practice of supporting women in conflict areas. South Africa has supported women in countries such as the DRC, Burundi, and South Sudan. We have also been training and building the capacity of many women across the continent so that they can be part of peace processes. Our Gertrude Shope Women's Mediation Network, and the work of civil society organizations such as the SAWIT, the AFWIT, the Accord, the IJR, the ISS, and the CSVR, and many others are examples of how South Africa has and continue to support women in conflict areas and promote the women's peace and security agenda globally and continentally. This, however, has been an increase in conflict with many humanitarian consequences that directly impact women. In Africa, Europe, Middle East, and Asia, we see how inter and intrastate conflicts have impacted women and children. We cannot escape the image of thousands of women and children being forced to flee their homes because of armed conflict. Rape continues to be used as a weapon of war in many of the conflicts. Women's livelihood, reproductive and sexual health are directly affected. Although women are victims during conflict, many more are also actors during conflict, raising awareness about its impact, becoming advocates for peace and peace builders, mediators, and human rights defenders, as well as providing humanitarian support. Chairperson, Program Director, today's dialogue seeks to, among others, highlight the impact of conflict on women and the different role women occupy during conflict, reaffirm the need for peace resolution of conflict, elicit the role that women peace builders can play in supporting women in conflict areas, and through this then also strengthen the implementation of our own national action plan. Program Director, we meet at a time when conflicts have become protracted, and more complex, all with devastating humanitarian impact, especially on women and children. International humanitarian law aims to elevate and prevent the pain and suffering of all those affected by armed conflict and war without discrimination, including on the grounds of sex. Notwithstanding the above, the IHL recognizes that women face particular and specific challenges during times of war. Key amongst them being target of sexual violence, including rape being used as weapon of war, forced prostitution, and indecent assault, all of which are war crimes. In addition, risks to their health, including sexual and reproductive health, are heightened due to inadequate access to health care services during this time. Program Director, instances of women and children being used to shield combatants from attack continue to take place. Women are also often left to bear the responsibility within their communities of other impacts of conflict, including food supply disruption, impacted infrastructure, particularly water and sanitation infrastructure, health facilities. After an armed conflict, women often play a key role in rebuilding communities. To lessen the impact of armed conflict on women in conflict zones, international humanitarian law should be respected and implemented by all parties to a conflict. This will come a long way in ensuring that the rights and freedoms of women are upheld, respected, and protected. Program Director, this is a time dialogue as we all seek to chart ways in which we can resolve conflict peacefully. Women's role in this endeavor is absolutely critical. I therefore trust that you will develop concrete recommendations for how we can assist in moving peace processes forward in all conflict contexts. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Minister Candith Mashego-Dlamini. I think that those opening remarks express why we are here today, indicating to us how women are impacted during conflict and how we need to be showing solidarity. We will now have our second set of remarks by the Honourable Minister Pinky Kekana, who is Deputy Minister in the Presidency. She has also served on the ANC, or she still serves on the ANC National Executive Committee. Previously was Deputy Minister of Communications, and prior to that, Executive Mayor of the Waterberg District, and also Secretary General of the Pan-African Women's Organization. Thank you for being here with us. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Happy International Women's Day and good morning to our Deputy Minister, Mayor Candith Mashego-Dlamini, the Deputy Minister of International Relations and Cooperation. Let me also recognize Her Excellency Mayor Fionnuala Gillis-Nunn, Ambassador of Ireland. Also recognize Her Excellency from the Embassy of the State of Palestine, Ambassador Hanan Jarrah Quarot. Our one and only Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, the immediate past Executive Director of the UN Women and AULIN Global Convener. Let me also recognize Madam Benita Diop, our Special Envoy on Women, Peace and Security in the African Union. Let me recognize the President of our South African chapter of AULIN, Mayor Charlotte Lobe, representatives of the Gertrude Chopin Women Mediation Network, representatives of SAWIT who are here with us, government representatives, global movements, our civil society organizations, all present here today, ladies and gentlemen. This week began with the opening of the 66th session of the UN Commission on the Status of Women, CSW 66, for its 2-week-long gathering. Our very own Her Excellency Ambassador Matu Joyini, the permanent representative of South Africa, is the chair of CSW 66 and opened the session at the United Nations headquarters in New York yesterday. On the same day, UN Secretary General, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, called yet again for an end to wars. This time, because of the impact on other parts of the world, namely Africa, calling it the hunger hurricane, in reference to the potential famine in the parts of Africa who import wheat and oil from the Ukraine, amongst other commodities. War anywhere in the world impacts Africa disproportionately. As the war rages unabated in Europe, Africa is also the continent with the most number of armed conflicts of our own, whether due to terrorist insurgency, like in Algeria, Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Chad, the DRC, Libya, Mali, Mozambique, Niger, Nigeria, Tanzania, and Tunisia, or the South Sudan's ethnic violence war. The most recent, the Tigray War in Ethiopia and Eritrea, resulted in more than 9,000 documented casualties, even though some sources estimated at more than 50,000 as at September 2021. Hundreds of thousands of African lives are being lost due to war with no peace in sight. At the Munich Security Conference, a few days before Russia invaded Ukraine, Kenya's Minister of Foreign Affairs, His Excellency Rachel Omamo, said, "War has changed. War is moving into cities. You are just as likely to be gang raped in an informal settlement in an African city as you are out on the war front." As South Africans, we know this all too well. At one point, we were referenced as the rape capital of the world. While we no longer hold the dreadful spot, we are still in the top 5 of the highest rape cases in the world, indicating that our war in South Africa forms part of this changing nature of warfare. As we know, weaponizing women's bodies through abuse, sexual violence, and even femicide is a characteristic of war, regardless of whether this is in the traditional or changing context of warfare. It has been more than 20 years since the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security, underlining the importance of women's equal participation and full involvement in all efforts to maintain and promote peace and security. The resolution further called on all actors involved when negotiating and implementing peace agreements to adopt a gender perspective, including the special needs of women and girls during repatriation, resettlement, rehabilitation, reintegration, and post-conflict reconstruction. Nonetheless, women continue to be excluded from peace processes globally. At an 18 January 2022 UN Security Council meeting, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, briefed ministers and other officials from around the world during a council's open debate, saying, despite the best efforts to ensure that peace is built by and for women, the prospects for their participation in the very negotiations intended to secure their future are vastly worse than before the pandemic. South Africa has always been at the table, being present and actively participating in platforms around the world to advance the interests of women, whether being in the midst of history when the Beijing Declaration and the Platform of Action in 1995 was adopted, or at the Windhoek Declaration in mainstreaming a gender perspective in multidimensional peace support operations, or the adoption of the historic Resolution 1325, or this week being the chair of CSW at a time when a war that is playing out in Europe could have massive ramifications for Africa, catalyzing further complexities and exacerbating current armed conflicts for various reasons. South Africa is always present. Once again, we are present and accounted for, joining the 97 other UN member states and 28 other African countries with a national action plan on women, peace, and security. As we engage in the implementation of the NEP ensuring women's participation in peace building is not only about rights. Women are crucial partners in propping up the 3 pillars of sustainable peace, which is economic recovery, social cohesion, and political legitimacy. A few of the critical implementation not negotiables for South Africa should be how we conscientize Resolution 1325 in the context of daily lives of our people and put into perspective what the reality of girls and women look like. As is so often the case with Resolution 1325 across the world, women are always speaking to themselves and outside the power centers of decision-making. We will need to ensure that women's safety is on the agenda of government's most critical and formal structures, because it needs to be normalized in the framework of key objectives, especially in my responsibility of monitoring and evaluation as the Deputy Minister in the presidency. From a UN perspective, measurements of implementation of the NEP rests on a few things. One, on allocated budgets for implementation, and secondly, on specific actions towards disarmament. And in our case, we will need to develop more insights and intelligence in how to integrate the changing context of warfare in respect to what that means for disarmament. And thirdly, on allocation of a specific role to civil society organizations for implementation. As we move forward on the next steps towards implementation, I want to officially give you my unconditional support and make a formal request that you engage me on regular status updates on progress of implementation, especially in the aspects of critical importance that I have highlighted today. As we conscientize the NEP for ordinary citizens, I would like to share with you my wish for Resolution 1325 to become part of education curriculums for primary school onwards, part of national labor language and narrative, and part of conversations in homes all across our great nation. It is not just a gender discussion. It is not just a peace and security discussion. It must be a national conversation of citizenry. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Deputy Minister, for those very thoughtful remarks, noting that the 66th session of the Status of Women has taken place, and we also thank Ambassador Matu, who was also part of the journey of the NAP, for holding the South African flag high at the UN. Our Deputy Minister calling for an end to wars, noting the changing nature of our wars, the weaponizing of women's bodies, and that the wars are now in the home, in the community, as well as on the battlefield. Noting also that South Africa has been at the forefront of the women's peace and security agenda from its inception. We know, Deputy Minister, with you in the presidency, our NAP is in good hands for monitoring, and we thank you for that as well. Our next speaker to make some opening remarks is Her Excellency Fiona Gilsenan, who is the Ambassador of Ireland to South Africa. Ambassador Gilsenan has a long history of working in the Foreign Service. I'm not going to name all of those. She has also been ambassador to Zimbabwe, Lesotho. Oh, she is now currently, sorry, ambassador to Zimbabwe, Lesotho, Mauritius, and Botswana, and previously ambassador to Tanzania, Burundi, and the East African community, also well known to us, working on the Women, Peace and Security agenda, because Ireland has been good support for us as well. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Programme Director. Let me start by recognising the former ED of UN Women, Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka. Let me also recognise Special Envoy Benita Diop. Honourable Candith Mashego-Dlamini, Deputy Minister of International Relations and Cooperation. Honourable Pinky Kekana, Deputy Minister in the Presidency, ambassadors, honourable guests and friends. It's a real pleasure to be here this morning. I'd like to start just by thanking you, Cheryl, for facilitating this important discussion, and to Charlotte, I've got my bodyguards on either side, and her colleagues at DIRCO for hosting us this morning. And when I arrived here, I was greeted with this, which is the shorter version of the National Action Plan for Popularisation. So I really just want to congratulate you on it, because it looks so accessible. I haven't had a chance to read it, but when Minister Kekana was talking about the importance of popularising, this is, I think, the kinds of materials that we need that make it easy for activists and for ordinary women and young girls to pick this up and understand what it is we're trying to do with the Women, Peace and Security agenda. When I looked at the programme earlier this week, I just noted the countries where women peace builders have been invited to speak today. So I'm just going to read them out: Ethiopia, South Sudan, Palestine, Mozambique, DRC, Western Sahara, and Ukraine. So in all these places, conflict, low level and or acute, is a daily reality. The eyes of the world are currently on Ukraine, and our thoughts are with its people, including the women and girls who face such trauma and hardship, trapped in cities under constant fire and as refugees fleeing to an uncertain future. The decision of the Russian Federation to launch an illegal invasion violated the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, and it's created a humanitarian catastrophe. As with so many conflicts throughout the world, the effects are highly gendered, with already 3 million people, mostly women and children, forced to become refugees, while young men are required to take up arms to defend their country. Already we're hearing of an increase in trafficking and sexual violence as criminals and abusers seek to capitalise on the vulnerability of those fleeing from the bloodshed. This is the reality of conflict for women all over the world. And our dialogue here today is a timely opportunity to express our solidarity with the women and girls in all conflicts. Indeed, that is the purpose of today's dialogue. It's also a moment to remember that women and girls are not just victims of conflict. They are participants, they are peacekeepers, they are peace builders. And we know that we can mitigate against the eruption of conflict by ensuring that women are full and equal participants and military in political and security decision making. This is why we have to protect and fortify the WPS agenda. And as Cheryl has pointed out, WPS is not a separate agenda. It is an intrinsic part of our peace and security agenda and shouldn't be seen as something that's sidelined. At the same time, we have to recognise that there large gaps remain between the aims of the agenda and the reality that we see on the ground. These gaps have widened further during the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's almost possible to forget that we're still in the middle of a pandemic now that daily we're looking at footage from Ukraine, but we are still in the middle of a pandemic, and that is further complicating conflicts all over the world, on the continent and also in Europe. We also recognise that advancing women's participation is not a panacea in itself. Women's political empowerment is only achievable alongside economic and social empowerment. And again, we have to remember Ambassador Joini in New York, who continues to fly the flag on that as South Africa chairs the CSW this month. And Ireland is grateful to South Africa for its leadership on this issue and many others. And we're very proud to work alongside you at the United Nations, the Africa Union, and of course here, where we're working together on the implementation of the National Action Plan, while we in Ireland work on the implementation of our own National Action Plan. Despite the progress we've seen at national level, 21 years on from its adoption, the core of the WPS agenda is seriously challenged. Equality advocates still find themselves fighting to break down the societal and structural barriers that prevent women from assuming their rightful place at the negotiation and decision-making table. And we know how quickly gains, including economic gains, can be reversed when the political tide turns. We only need to look at the continuing erosion of women's rights in Afghanistan. Once more, women are forced to argue for their basic human rights, the right to work, to education, to participate in civil and public life, and even to move freely around their own country, all in the face of continued violence and intimidation. But in spite of this, local women peace builders, human rights defenders, and other Afghan women continue to fight for their right to be heard and to participate, exposing themselves at times to grave peril in asserting those rights. These experiences are all too familiar to the equality advocates, human rights defenders, and women peace builders we will hear from today. And we're grateful to them for their fortitude and relentless efforts to achieve and sustain peace. We in Ireland know from our own experience the impact that women peace builders can have in turning their societies away from violence. We also know the trauma and impact of violence is not simply forgotten with the onset of a ceasefire or the signing of a peace agreement. I'm always reminded when we talk about resilience that we often forget to mention the reality of trauma. And I don't think we should praise people for their resilience without recognising that that resilience is accompanied by very significant trauma. Conflict-related sexual violence remains a weapon of war and that is deliberately used. Survivors still struggle for justice and for the rights to be supported in post-traumatic situations. The provision of financial supports, pathways to justice and health services are crucial to empowering women to respond to their trauma. This includes access to comprehensive sexual and reproductive health services and rights, and groups such as the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund are already doing critical work in this area. We've also seen that public-private partnerships can make a difference towards relief and recovery, and we should work more to integrate them into our own responses. But we also need to see funding to fuel women's economic empowerment. Financing women-owned micro-businesses and providing educational opportunities can be transformative. As we will see from today's speakers, local women's organisations and grassroots women peace builders play an essential role. We, the international community, must stand with them and we must support them. Money matters. Doing so helps women to secure their rightful and active role in political, social and economic life. I thank you.
Many thanks, Ambassador Gilsenan, for your opening remarks, recognizing that the effects of war are highly gendered, that women are both victims and actors. We act as peace builders, as human rights defenders, as peacekeepers, noting that there is still a large gap between the aims of the Women, Peace and Security agenda and the reality on the ground. Also noting that we cannot have peace for women without there being a concomitant development, economic security that goes alongside of it. Noting that in Ireland, the struggle for women's participation and for implementing the WPS agenda is still with the women there, as it is for many women in other countries. And that money matters. We cannot implement the Women, Peace and Security agenda without having both the human resources and the financial resources to do so. Thank you for that. We will move now to our next panel, which will be an overview of the South African National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security. We will have three speakers who will put our NAP into context. Our first speaker is Ms. Charlotte Lobe, who is the South Africa Focal Person on Women, Peace and Security and President of Ireland, champion of our NAP. The floor is yours, Charlotte.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Let me recognize the participation of the former President of the Republic of South Africa and former Executive Director of UN Women, as well as the co-convener of Aulin, Madam Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, who is following proceedings of this dialogue in New York, attending CSW. Also recognize the participation of the AU Special Envoy on Women, Peace and Security and the Global Co-Convener of Aulin, Madam Benita Diop. Recognize the participation of the Deputy Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, who is also following proceedings of this dialogue in Cape Town, where she will be attending the meeting of the Portfolio Committee on International Relations later this morning. Recognize the presence of Deputy Minister in the Presidency and Coordinator of Political Participation of the Aulin South African chapter, Madam Pinky Kekana, Ambassador of Ireland to South Africa, who is a great friend of South African women on issues of peace and security, as well as on issues of economic inclusion of women. Excellency Fionola Gilson, and I'm the only one who can pronounce your name properly this morning. Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps who are part of the proceedings this morning, both here and who are joining us remotely. Ladies and of course gentlemen who are here this morning. This year, as Madam Kekana has said, South Africa is at the helm of the UN Commission on Status of Women, which is in session as we convene here today. The UN CSW 66 is meeting under the theme Achieving Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women and Girls in the Context of Climate Change, Environmental and Disaster Risk Reduction Policies and Programs. As the people who are here today, I believe all of us would want to wish Ambassador Matujoyini, Permanent Representative of South Africa, to the UN well in her capacity as the chair of UN CSW. Program Director, our National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security places high premium on solidarity with women living in vulnerable situations as a result of armed conflict and war. In fact, as I was preparing for this dialogue, I had to check how many times we mentioned the word solidarity in our action plan. We mentioned the word solidarity 8 times, and we mentioned it in all sections under all pillars. And I believe that this is an important thing to acknowledge, that even at the beginning or at the conceptualization stages of our National Action Plan, we already wanted to stand in solidarity with women in conflict. Our National Action Plan also directs us to support and offer solidarity to women peace-building organizations. The reason for this, ladies and gentlemen, is that South Africa is a product of international solidarity. The values that inspire and guide South Africa as a nation are deeply rooted in the long years of struggle for liberation. As a beneficiary of many acts of selfless solidarity in the past, South Africa strongly accepts as true that what it wishes for its people should be what it wishes for the citizens of the world. Our wish for a peaceful South Africa where its citizens are equal, enjoy human rights, and are treated with dignity is our wish for the people of Western Sahara, people living in Sahel region, people living in the Great Lakes, people living in the Middle East, people living in Myanmar in Asia, and the citizens of the world as a whole, including the people of Ukraine and Russia. We are humbled that it is through international solidarity that apartheid was declared crime against humanity in October 1973 by the United Nations. From this experience, we can boldly attest that international solidarity is a precondition to human dignity, the basis of all human rights, and a human-centered approach to development, and has a bridge-building function across all divides and encompasses the values of social justice and equity, goodwill among peoples and nations, and integrity of the international community, as well as sovereignty and sovereign equality of all states and friendly relations amongst the states and the people of the world. During these uncertain times, when the global community is confronted with the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic, international solidarity should take a more central role, including in peace and security architecture, in sustainable development, in financing for development, in South-South cooperation, as well as North-South cooperation. We are glad that as we convene this dialogue today, we are a practical expression of South-North cooperation, because we are working closely with the Embassy of Ireland in trying to understand the root causes of conflict, but also in how women can contribute meaningfully in bringing about a peaceful world. International solidarity has defined the work of the UN since its inception in 1945. Drawing together nations and peoples to promote peace and security, human rights, and development. The UN was founded at the backdrop of horrors of the Second World War, with the aim of saving future generations from the scourge of war. It is for this reason that the Charter of the UN enjoins all member states to settle their disputes by peaceful means in such a manner that international peace, security, and justice are not endangered. With the escalating armed conflict in various regions in our continent, in the Middle East, in the Americas, and in Europe and in Asia, international solidarity far exceeds the sense of a common bond. It implies understanding the reality that as the global community, our destiny is intertwined, and this is a point that we are making in our National Action Plan. Solidarity requires outward rejection of narrow nationalism that by its nature infringes on the rights and liberties of others. The case in question being that of the people of Western Sahara, whose right to self-determination, independence, and dignity remains one of the injustices of our time. The West Sahara conflict is an ongoing conflict between the people of Western Sahara, led by Polisario Front on one hand, and the Kingdom of Morocco on the other. The quest for nationhood for the people of Western Sahara remain one of Africa's longest unresolved political questions. The escalating conflict witnessed in recent periods, the cruel bombings and killings of the innocent people, whether in Ukraine or in Palestine or in Mozambique, are sad realities of the changing nature of warfare that the program director has referred to, as well as Madam Pinky Kekana. This changing nature of warfare we have seen that civilians are increasingly targeted, majority of whom are women and children. The adoption of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 in 2000 was the first resolution to link women to peace and security, acknowledging that armed conflict impacts women and girls differently from men and boys. The Women, Peace and Security agenda, driven by grassroots organization and by women living in war and those who are working for peace, recognizes the role and contribution of women in wartime and to peacemaking, as well as the fundamental right to be included in peace processes. And this is the reason why we are here today, is the reason why we have the kind of the National Action Plan that we have. This resolution did not appear with no prior history, program director, or engagements on issues of women, peace and security. In fact, there is a rich history of women suffering disproportionately during a conflict situation, even prior to the First World War. In 1908, as Madam Candith Mashego said, 15,000 women marched in New York City, US, demanding shorter working hours, better pay, and the right to vote. Following this march, the Women Workers' Day was celebrated in New York on the 28th of February 1909, organized by the Socialist Party of America. As already stated by speakers before me, the first International Women's Day was observed in the US on the 28th of February 1909, followed by Socialist International meeting in Copenhagen, where the International Women's Day was institutionalized. You may ask, why am I now reminding you of this history when we are discussing conflict? The reason for that is that during 1913 to 1914, International Women's Day was used as a mechanism and a tool for protesting World War I. We are here again during the International Women's Day month, and again, we shall use it as a tool to protest against war and conflict taking place in various parts of the world. On 22nd August 1918, more than 2,000 women from the Allied forces from all over the world, including Africa, met at the Congress of Allied Women on War Service and collectively decided, and I quote, to improve the unparalleled opportunity of interpreting to one another the women of the nations in whose hands will rest in increasing measures the formative influences in the building of the new world. It is believed that such forces, meaning women, rightly stimulated and directed, will shorten the war, close quote. This statement, in my view, Program Director, remains valid today. The women of the nations of the world has the agency not only to shorten the war or armed conflict, but to prevent war from happening and secure a peaceful world where in future generations can live in harmony. We remain deeply concerned by conflicts in many parts of the world today. For example, conflict and instability trends in the Horn of Africa make the region one of the most unstable regions in the world. Many parts of the Horn of Africa remain unable to break free of armed conflict, violent crime, communal violence, extremism, political instability, and the state failures that have plagued the region for decades. In the recent period, we have experienced the devastating escalation of conflict between Ethiopia and Tigray forces. And in all of this, people who are mostly affected are women and, of course, children. The Horn of Africa has been the site of several armed conflicts, both intra and interstate. It has also experienced severe environmental degradation because of the impact of climate change that has led to livelihood insecurities, again impacting women disproportionately. In the Sahel region, a significant cause of violence has been the rise of extremist movements within the region. Religious extremist groups and militias have gained influence in the Sahel region for quite some time now. This has caused the region to become an epicenter for conflict. The Sahel region comprises of one of the world's harshest climates, as you are aware, and faces some of the biggest challenges of development and peace. Many of the world's poorest and insecure countries are found in this region, including countries such as Mali, Burkina Faso, Chad, Niger. And we have noted that just apart from conflict, the region is faced with multiple other challenges that requires our solidarity as the women of South Africa. In the Great Lakes region, we have observed some of the most difficult and turbulent conflicts. For over a period of 20 years, this region has experienced genocide in Rwanda, civil war in Burundi, and cross-border conflict in the DRC. This was exacerbated by internal and external illegal armed groups. The decades of violent conflict in the DRC extends through the Great Lakes region, and it is a good example of how national intra-conflicts impact on the region. In other words, if as South Africa, we are not concerned of the well-being of our sister countries in the region, it may as well be that the violence that we see today in Mozambique may spill over to South Africa. It is in our interest to stand in solidarity, but also to help the people around us to resolve conflicts. I know the chair is showing me the time, but it's important for us to put some context to our debates of today. I just ask for just 2 minutes to complete. In Southern Africa, we have seen escalation of conflict in northeastern Mozambique quite recently, where about 670,000 people have been forced to flee their countries to neighboring countries. And as you know, this conflict is in Mozambique's Cabo Delgado province, and it started in 2017. We also are concerned of the continued conflict in the Middle East, because we have noted that for many years, the Middle East has been the world's continual hotbed for conflict. We must continue to support efforts of the global community aimed at reviving a peaceful process that will lead to the establishment of a viable Palestinian state existing side by side in peace and harmony with the Israel state within internationally recognized borders. The two-state solution remains the only viable model for the people of Palestine and Israel. All peace-loving people must reject in strong possible ways the continued Israel's systemic policies of colonial expansion, ethnic cleansing, and military occupation of the most brutal kind, which as South Africa, we readily recognize from our own experience of apartheid. We are also concerned of the ongoing armed conflict in Myanmar, in Southeast Asia. I could not have not said this. The DDG for Asia and Middle East is in the room. Should not forgive me for not mentioning Myanmar in my input. After the conflict escalated significantly in early 2019, it was reported that nearly 40% of Rohingya villages targeted by the Myanmar militaries were empty or burned down. It is estimated that following this attack, over 400,000 people have crossed into Bangladesh, Thailand, and other nearby countries. In 2021, Myanmar experienced a military coup that jeopardized the peaceful democratic transition that started in 2011 following decades of military brutal regime. Again, this has a gender-specific dimension. Coming to what most people thought was going to be the first thing I was going to speak about, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. We hope that the discussion here today will lead us to make concrete recommendation not only on Ukraine and Russia conflict, but on conflicts that I have reflected on, ladies and gentlemen. We hope that the current discussions that are there at the diplomatic level will yield positive results for the situation of the women of Ukraine who are now forced to flee their country and go to neighboring countries. South Africa is of a view that this armed conflict, like all others, will result in unnecessary human suffering and destruction with global ramifications. In situations of conflict, the most vulnerable tend to suffer most, particularly during war and armed conflict. And just to say that we support the statement that was made by the UN Secretary General that was calling for all parties involved in the conflict to use peaceful means to resolve the current conflict, and to say that what we have all experienced and seen on TV's a situation of Ukrainian women fleeing their country has now placed bare the situation of many women around the world who on a daily basis are forced to flee their countries as a result of conflict, whether in the Sahel, whether in the Middle East, whether in Myanmar, in Asia. What we need to be saying as we meet in this dialogue today is that one conflict, one too many. We need to build a world order that is able to reflect on its challenges, but is able to come up with solutions using mechanisms that are peaceful. As we always say, Program Director, the peace for us does not necessarily mean the absence of conflict. You have conflict everywhere, but the one thing that we need as the people of the world, as women meeting in this dialogue today, is the ability for the global community to use peaceful means to resolve our conflicts of today and our conflicts of tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Charlotte Lobe, for your very passionate and comprehensive presentation. And I think also for your steadfast role in popularizing and implementing the Women, Peace and Security agenda in South Africa and across the continent. Providing us with a bit of overview for why the world commemorates International Women's Day, how our National Action Plan places a high premium on solidarity with women in conflict, that South Africa itself has been a product of international solidarity, and that it is a precondition for human dignity. And so that this dialogue here today, and we will dialogue, it will not just be presentations, it will be more interactive a little later, but that it is a practical expression of international solidarities, that our destinies are intertwined. And then noting that it was in Western Sahara, there is a long-standing conflict on this continent, remaining unresolved, key political questions that need to be answered. But also that conflict on this continent and globally since 2013 has been on the increase. It requires us then to reflect on why this is taking place, firstly, what is leading to all of these conflicts, and also to revisit our structures and our processes for conflict management, because they are also beginning to be questioned. Are they fit for purpose given our current conflict context? And I think that you highlight that. Also that women and children in all conflicts bear the brunt of those wars. And this is what we are here to say. I note one of the sayings that our Minister of International Cooperation and you too, Charlotte, have always said, and we need to reaffirm here today, we are not here to make wars safer for women. We are here to stress the need for peaceful resolution of conflicts and to find pathways for that peace to occur. I now want to call on our next speaker, Colette Lojane, who is the Executive Director of URISA, also being a key part of the process of developing and implementing our National Action Plan. Actually, Colette, you can come up and take my seat here, and I will move there. Yeah.
So it's okay. Okay. It's okay.
The camera won't get you, though.
Good morning, everybody. And thank you, Professor Cheryl and Rex, the facilitator. I also wish to recognize very important figures in our midst, beginning with Candith Mashego-Dlamini, the Deputy Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Ms. Pinky Kekana, Deputy Minister in the Presidency, Fainola Jinsenan, Ambassador of Ireland to South Africa, Ms. Charlotte Lobe, South Africa Focal Person on Women, Peace and Security, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor and privilege for the Human Rights Institute of South Africa to be provided this platform to speak on a dialogue in solidarity with women in conflict areas, a dialogue that is humbly organized by my partners, colleagues that have been working tirelessly for many years and up to the time where the National Action Plan was launched through contributions and support of many of us, recognizing Gertrude Shope, Women Network, Alwyn Sawit, IJR, Lupeco, URISA Accord, and Foundation for Human Rights. Today is another occasion where the civil society pride ourselves that definitely the process of developing South Africa's National Action Plan was not an infutile process, but is a process that has been taken very seriously, particularly by our government. We have seen our government opening doors, rising up to the occasion in accepting us and working in solidarity with the civil society, reminding us of those dark era periods of apartheid, where we knew how to collaborate, we knew how to work in solidarity and reaching out to the poor of the poor and developing mechanisms together for a peaceful South Africa that ushered South Africa into a constitutional and human rights transformed country. Our NEP in South Africa, it embodies human rights foundation. It is a practical document that is easily accessible to the people of South Africa because the rights that are safeguarded in our National Action Plan are actually extracted in our Constitution, which gives human dignity, equality, and social and economic rights, and environmental rights, and the right of women and equality as a center, as a priority. Our National Action Plan, as I've mentioned, it enshrines international mechanism, international treaties. We've seen that the Beijing Platform Action, which recognize the plight of women who are mainly the victims in times of crisis. They have been recognized as a key stakeholders in playing a remarkable role at the grassroots, not only as victims, but to be peace brokers, to be mediators, and to foster a culture of respect of human dignity for the society, particularly in times of conflict. It also enhances policymakers. It gives them a new tool to develop laws that take account to the human dignity and respect of women, particularly their participation in peace building and mediation. It recognizes the rights of all women, regardless of their sexual orientation, their gender, and political background, and sex and age. We know that women with disability, they can play a role in this National Action Plan. Women with sexual orientation and migrants as well, they play a key role in the National Action Plan. Civil society is recognized as that important stakeholder in enforcement and implementation of the National Action Plan. We have seen the role of South Africa in 2019 when we were a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council. Chairing that Security Council, we sponsored a very remarkable resolution, Resolution 2493. That resolution is speaking to the rights that are safeguarded in the National Action Plan, which emphasizes participation, prevention of women in peace building. And civil society had taken up this opportunity by playing that important role, particularly since 2020, during the COVID-19 pandemic. We have seen civil society collaborating in unity with government, mobilizing resources to conduct capacity building. We've seen civil society popularizing the National Action Plan, making it very easy and accessible. And today, we congratulate the role of the Coalition on Women, Peace and Security for bringing together a simplified document that anyone in the country can reach and use, even in school institutions. Congratulations for this document. The document will also be translated into local languages so that even people in informal settlement, in rural areas, people who are not familiar or are not English speaking, they can see themselves in the National Action Plan. We have also fostered a great program which we are embarking. The program is currently organizing public awareness events, sensitization programs, dialogues, capacity building for women, in rural areas. In all 9 provinces of South Africa, we will be embarking this program. We are also sharing our own experience working during local government election, where we established a women election monitoring mechanism. That election monitoring mechanism was another experience created here at local level by the Women Coalition on Women, Peace and Security. The women themselves were trained and monitored and documented information on participation, on safe environment, on prevention, and also relief and rehabilitation and humanitarian aid that needs to be provided to women in times of election. And whether, facilities such as bathrooms, water, and sanitations were provided. The women were able to document and provided the information to the Electoral Commission of South Africa. Women also played a role as peace envoys in the country. During the time of a conflict in KZN, conflict, racism between Indian community and the Zulu communities. We have seen the vital role of this group working together with the UN Women, supported to conduct peace and mediation role. So we have created our own precedent in understanding our own situation, our own cultural background, our own dynamic in using the Women Peace and Security National Action Plan. More still needs to be done because the situation of South Africa remains very unique for women. Gender-based violence remain our own challenge. LGBTI community, including xenophobia and racism. The National Action Plan provides us this opportunity to once again put our experiences in tackling this problem through peaceful means. And we want to congratulate South Africa again for really promoting the spirit of unity, the spirit of solidarity, the spirit of social cohesion, that you have given us the space to grow in our own country, not to only brag about our processes and expertise outside the country, at global level, in the region, but also to be very effective, to be very, proactive in our own situation at the grassroots level. We thank you very much. And one last point, which I also want to add on, the AU Agenda 2030 is also part of the process of the National Action Plan. And Maputo Protocol, the protocol on the rights of women, is also emphasizes around women, peace and security. We would like to thank South Africa for being relevant and for being resilient in ensuring that they will find a strategy to bring us together in solidarity with the old world and actually highlighting our own background, that it is not just about us rising up today, but it is who we are, it is our identity, and we thank you once more for this space. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Colette. We are running out of time, so I'm trying to, it's fine. You had lots of important things to say. So I'm going to ask speakers to please just stick to 5 minutes, 7 minutes max. So thank you, Colette. I think a very important point that you noted right at the beginning is that women in civil society and in government in South Africa have shown that we can work together to achieve our goals. And this National Action Plan is just but one example of it. And then speaking to what we have been doing to try and implement the National Action Plan. Can I call on Celeste Diale? I think she is online, who will represent youth on the youth journey. Are you there, Celeste? Good.
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
In the process of implementing the National Action Plan, You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Professor Cheryl. I appreciate that. Good morning to you all, and may all protocols be observed. It is such a privilege to speak in platforms like these and representing the Generation Equality Forum Peace Youth Journey. And I hope my words will represent you well and spark fires in the hearts of those who are thought leaders and change agents of our generation. This journey that has started 21 years ago is now reaching its finality, but is in the beginning of its new generation that started when the United Nations Security Council adopted a game-changing, transformative resolution 1325 on women, peace and security under the presidency of Namibia in 2019. In taking this agenda forward, South Africa in her presidency of the United Security Council ensure that Resolution 1325 is adopted, but most importantly, adopted unanimously. This resolution further strengthened the women, peace and security agenda and urges and encourages the United Nations members states to implement this important agenda. We as South African youth and Generation Equality Youth Journey are already walking the talk. We are also encouraged by United Nations Security Council 2250 on the youth, peace and security. In conflict areas, youth are the main targets, and we recommend that South Africa develops its National Action Plan on Youth, Peace and Security. And because the pillar of the National Action Plan on women, peace and security is based on 4 pillars. And the first is then participation, and second is prevention, and the third is protection, and the fourth is relief and recovery. I mentioned these even though they are in our booklet, and even though they're in the shorter version of the National Action Plan. I mentioned them because we need to understand it in context that even though we've got these pillars have priorities. And some of the priorities are to develop and implement and assess gender-sensitive laws and policies and strategies. And as South Africa has been going through a lot of grief lately and losing young people who are taking their own lives, we as the young people seen the necessity to be able to use these documents as things that we can build and develop the policies and the strategies that we need to be able to reach out to one another and ensure meaningful participation of women in peace and processes and structures and institutions. And some of these pillars have created platforms like the Peace Pod podcast, which is something very beautiful that had happened during the launch of the Generation Equality Forum, where young people drove their own agendas and their own peace dialogues and came together from different industries. And considering the National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security, the Peace Pod's mission was then created to assist in delivering the Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, which is participation and prevention in strategic outcomes. Our objectives are to normalize the promotion of peace, provide an open platform for diverse dialogues, utilize synergies with partners and sponsorships to provide relief effort and promote conflict resolution. We are embarking on inspiring more podcasts to pop up all around the world, so that it's not just Peace Pod South Africa, but it can be Peace Pod Ireland, Peace Pod Ukraine, Peace Pod Russia, Peace Pod and throughout all of Africa as well. And we want to assist young people in directing dialogues to speak about judicial shortfalls experienced by women, by boys as well, and non-gender conforming persons, and substance abuse and suicide, human trafficking and blesser syndromes, sexual abuse and teenage pregnancy, disabilities and disability awareness, and most importantly, mental health. Mental health, which has become another pandemic that plagues the youth, especially after this pandemic. The United Nations Security Council adopted unanimously on the 9th of December 2015 a groundbreaking resolution on youth, peace and security, which recognizes that young people play an important and positive role in maintenance and promotion of international peace security. This United Nations Security Council Resolution 2250, it identifies 5 key pillars for action, participation, protection, prevention, and partnerships in disengagement and reintegration. This landmark resolution urges member states to give youth a greater voice in decision-making at the local, at the national and regional, international levels, and to consider setting up mechanisms that would enable young people to participate meaningfully in peace processes. And it sounds very, very small, but in many cases, like for example, the Peace Pod, we have had people from different types of industries coming together just to speak about issues that plague us. If we can remember, we can just go back a little bit in 2020 when South Africa was in conflict with itself. We can remember the first places that were being looted were places of alcohol and places that sold alcohol. And if you can know that alcohol is really the place where a lot of people go to depress some of the issues that they go through, and these are mental health issues. And so imagine if we had a world where instead of running to a bottle store or a place for refuge like that, we can then have peaceful architecture, peaceful, because in other words, peace looks different for everyone, right? We always say at the Peace Pod that peace can be a light, a street light in a hood for some people. Peace can be a church for some people. It can be a strong place for engagement. And peace can also become a place where we are using or creating inclusion in peaceful, safe society by building comprehensive peace-building architecture, cultivating a culture of peace, and institutions are now helping us to prevent measures of breaking down some of the stereotypes of young people who just don't want to listen, who just want to party, they just want alcohol, and they just want this. But now we have these documents that the young people can now use to implement and actually use their voices and say, listen, this is what we need. And to quote and add on to what Mama Charlotte Lobe always says is that women are not to be used as cannon foders and pocket knives for big man politics. And we say the same thing for youth. The youth should not be used as cannon foders and pocket knives for young men, for big men and small men politics. So we are using our voices. We're saying we are ready. We're using the National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security. This document that is in your hand right now, this document that is that is on the internet right now, that is accessible, that is legible, and that is legal as well. We are saying we want to use this document and implement some of the things that we need as young people. So thank you so much for this platform, and just in celebrating the life of Keisha Jemima Jefta, who was one of the dancers who was there at the Peace Pod launch during the Generation Equality Forum. She took her own life due to mental health issues, but we know that it's people like her that made an impact. She used her craft to come and display this beautiful National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security to bring up the voices of young people and say, look, maybe sometimes we can use our talents for peace. Maybe sometimes we can use our crafts for peace. And maybe sometimes we can use our talents to aid relief and recovery, to provide safe spaces of refuge for victims of humanitarian crises. Thank you so much for this platform, and peace to you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Celeste, and condolences to the family and friends of the youth whose life ended so abruptly. Young people indeed have an important role to play in peace building. We have a new generation of peace builders, both men and women. And I personally think that we are in competent and very enthusiastic hands going forward with our Women, Peace and Security agenda. We will also be having a Youth Peace Builders Award in September, October, around there. People like Celeste are working towards that. They've also developed a peace song, and I wonder if we can't just play that peace song for 1 minute quickly. Karen, please. We can't make it happen.
What if I told you there's a reason why you consistently hit short?
They did that.
If there's no peace, of love is gone. When there is peace, our world is strong. There's a time and a place when the world will be safe. If there's no peace, our love is gone. When there is peace, our world is strong.
Thank you very much, and especially to Lepeko, who developed that song for the National Action Plan, and UN Women, who sponsored the development of that song. It's still a very relevant song for us, will carry us through for many years to come. We'll be dancing to it and singing it. We are now going to move on to our panel in which women from conflict areas speak to what has been happening in those particular conflicts, especially to women and children. Our first speaker is Dziewinka Kachur, who is an author and a researcher at the Center for Complex Systems at Stellenbosch University and a member of the Ukraine Association of South Africa. Welcome.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to address everyone, and also thanks for the solidarity already expressed by all presenters today. We really appreciate the feel of that solidarity, especially as Ukraine is going through this massive conflict. And while correctly said that each conflict is a tragedy and one conflict is too many, at the moment, the scale of the conflict that is happening in Ukraine is simply devastating, because it's a country of 43 million of people. So we are talking of over 20 million of women that are going through suffering right now. As of today, there are more than 2.5 million of people who fled Ukraine, who became refugees within last 21 days, since on the 24th of February, Russia has invaded territory of Ukraine. These are predominantly women and children, as men of the age 18 to 60-year-old are not allowed to leave the country. Just the profile of those people. According to UNICEF, every second, one child in Ukraine becomes a refugee. While we are extremely grateful to all partnering neighboring countries that are allowing Ukrainian women and children to stay on their territory, we also are very aware of the higher risk of trafficking and abuse for those who are refugees. Within those 21 days, 379 education institutions have been destroyed, 31 hospitals have been attacked, and in Kharkiv only, one city in the east of Ukraine, over 600 multi-storied buildings have been destroyed, leaving thousands of people without homes. In the first 16 days of the war, 4,300 women gave birth, and 80,000 more women will give birth in the next 3 months. But the pressure on the medical facilities is enormous. The access to oxygen and medications is difficult, especially while the medical facilities are continuing to be attacked. 2 days ago in Mariupol, one of the cities in Ukraine, after inhuman bombing of the maternity ward, the pregnant woman and her unborn baby have died. Women, children, and elderly remain extremely vulnerable in the time of war. In many cities, women and children also can't leave the war areas as green corridors are denied, so they are remaining trapped in cities like Mariupol, Izium, Ohtyrka, Irpin, Kherson. We are talking about thousands of people who staying in bomb shelters with no food, no heating, while this is winter time in the beginning of spring in Ukraine, and no even water. One of them was a 6-year-old girl who died from dehydration in the bomb shelter. So this crisis, there is a need to address this crisis immediately. And the only approach that we believe all countries should take is to call the invader for immediate ceasefire and immediate removal of the military forces from the territory of independent state. We believe that the same approach can be used for all conflict. And in this situation, Ukraine is not asking for specific conditions, as long as the ceasefire is implemented and the military forces are removed. This conflict also will have massive effect on the women on the African continent. Ukraine is growing significant amounts of wheat, corn, barley, and various cooking oils. We already observe the increase of petrol prices that would affect the poorest and will have massive impact on women on the continent. The food shortages, especially in the northern Africa, but also in many countries in South Africa, where Ukraine and Russia both contribute to the food supply in those countries, will be in shortage, because at the moment Ukraine is unable to farm any food. So the planting is not happening, and the Russian government is spending a lot of money on the war, which will make also the growing food more challenging, access to the fertilizers and the farming equipment more challenging. So we can expect that this conflict will have a massive implication for women on the continent, especially the poorest population. Thus, I hope that all organizations that are present here today, in solidarity with women of Ukraine and in solidarity with women on all African continent, will call on Russian government to immediately stop the war. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zavinka, explaining the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, millions of refugees and displaced persons, the need for humanitarian corridors, the need for food, the need for access to basic medicines, for example, and calling there for a ceasefire. We move on to our next speaker, who is Ambassador Hanan Jarrah of Palestine, Ambassador to South Africa.
Thank you, Program Director. Thank you for the invitation. And despite the very short notice, I come from a place, first of all, I'm a woman, and then I come from a place that has been under attack in war since 74 years. So we can imagine the size of catastrophe. That's why we don't have the luxury to leave any moment or any spot to highlight the impact of colonization on women in particular. Excellencies, ministers, deputy ministers, special envoys, ambassadors, distinguished men and women present here and joining us online. Good morning and happy Women's Month. In today's dialogue, under the banner of solidarity with women in conflict areas, I would like to express my gratitude for the kind invitation to share a few remarks on how the Israeli occupation has and still impacts women in Palestine, and how South African women can support and stay in solidarity with Palestinian women and in women in areas of conflict in general. We all know that revolution is a woman. There has never been an uprising against oppression, colonialism, or racial segregation anywhere around the world that wasn't shouldered first and foremost by women. Palestinian women still face violence, threats, intimidation, dispossession, arrests, punitive measures, restriction on movement, and discrimination from Israeli forces on a daily basis. Israel, as an occupying power, continues to impose policies that violate international humanitarian law on a daily basis. Reports and testimonies on house demolitions, night raids, settler and soldier violence, and collective punishment perpetrated by the Israeli forces in an intentionally discriminatory manner are still a daily occurrence in the lives of Palestinian population, especially on Palestinian women's lives. Women who experience house demolitions by Israeli forces are generally given the option, you can imagine, the option to either have Israeli forces demolish their houses for outrageous demolition fee, or to do it themselves in a degrading and heart-wrenching task for the families who have fought to maintain their homes and livelihoods. The resulting trauma from housing demolitions and the threat of eviction mean that Palestinian women cannot enjoy the level of human rights and quality of life that they deserve. I will explain some of the human rights violations inflicted on Palestinian women by Israel that include but not limited to the gendered impact of Israeli illegal practices on Palestinian women. First, property destruction, demolition, and the lack of quality housing. For many women living in occupied Palestine, especially in East Jerusalem, house demolition and destruction remain a daily fear and reality. Intimidation and the possibility of losing their livelihood have profound economic, social, and psychological consequences on women and their families, who are often left homeless or forced to live in less than adequate or overcrowded conditions. Demolition notices are issued due to a lack of building permits, which are difficult to obtain. Overcrowding means it is difficult to obtain justification for a permit application. Families will spend thousands of shekels, which is the currency there, trying to rescind or oppose permit orders, leading to impoverishment, displacement, and mental and emotional strain, especially on wives, mothers, and sisters who are responsible for their families' welfare. The second, aggression and targeting of civilians, including night raids, resource restriction on movement. Military occupation has led to surges of violence against the Palestinian population by the Israeli military and has had disastrous effects on sense of safety for Palestinian women and girls in particular. Factors of aggression are night raids and arrests, restrictions on the freedom of movement by the permit system in West Bank and Gaza, and the restrictions on resources and aid entering the Gaza Strip by Israeli forces. Testimonies from women who have been subjected to night raids in their homes by Israeli forces said most occur between 2 and 4 a.m., many of which are aggressive. Tear gas, live bullets are excessively used, and soldiers are heavily armed. Citizens are threatened with weapons, forcibly removed from their homes in the middle of the night, and personal items are damaged or stolen. Approximately 1,360 night raids are conducted on Palestinians each year. The third factor, expansion of settlements and settler violence. Many women in Palestine fear their children will be injured, arrested, or killed for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Women reported being constantly alert for the well-being of their families. Israel continues to support settlement expansion that aggressively and illegally confiscate Palestinian land. Women are scared always to leave their houses alone after experiences of settler attacks both day and night. Soldier and settler violence, vandalism, and destruction of private property overburden women with increased financial, social, and psychological responsibilities. The fourth factor, forcible transfer of Palestinians from East Jerusalem and forcible transfer as a form of collective punishment. Referring here to the family reunification law. In an attempt to maintain a demographic majority, Israel has used a variety of methods to reduce the Palestinian population in the city of Jerusalem. Just last week, Israel passed a law denying naturalization to Palestinians from the occupied West Bank or Gaza married to Israeli citizens. I mean to Palestinian Israeli citizens, forcing thousands of Palestinian families to either immigrate or live apart. Women live in fear of being separated from their children in the case that they are forcibly transferred. Palestinian women who live in Jerusalem lose their temporary residency permits through a family unification procedure if the husband decides to divorce or to remarry. If the children have Jerusalem identity card and remain with the father, women will no longer be able to live in the same city as their children or even visit or see them. This is what we used to call here in South Africa apartheid procedures. 5. Targeting female human rights defenders and women journalists and activists. Women activists and journalists have been subjected to night raids, arrests, and punitive measures under the pretext of incitement against Israel or being accused of being anti-Semitic after criticizing Israeli occupation practices. Israel as an occupying power continues its aggressive and illegal treatment of human rights defenders for their coverage of Israeli violations toward Palestinians. As a result, Israel illegally takes measures to prohibit Palestinians, especially women, from advocating for their rights or making any expression of a political nature. Dear colleagues, in conclusion, part of the liberation struggle is to liberate women from occupation first, and then we can look into the patriarchal hegemony as a second. Just as the feminist movement motto in Palestine says, there is no free homeland without free women. The women of South Africa can support women in Palestine by engaging in dialogue, implementing a gender-sensitive international consultation with women journalists and human rights defenders and activists to assess all possible avenues to improve the situation, which may include providing communications technologies to improve safety, secure transport, and security in homes and offices, to name a few out of many. We must never underestimate the power of grassroots movements and networks, the power of solidarity, both regionally and globally, which create the necessary space for social debate and ultimately political change. Women of South Africa remain our inspiration, our hope that we too shall overcome and attain freedom and enjoy the very basic human rights that we are fighting for as women. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Jar. Palestine, 74 years now fighting for your liberation. And you're noting the violence, the fear, the intimidation that has accompanied this journey, the destruction of property, the psychological trauma that accompanies this as well, forced removals, etc. And then calling for more solidarity. Minister Fatima Mehdi Hassan was the Minister of Cooperation for the Sahrawi Republic. Also currently Secretary General of the National Union of Sahrawi Women. Welcome, you have the floor.
Good morning, sisters and brothers from South Africa and from all the world. I really would to thank you personally, Cherry, for this invitation. And I want to recognize also the solidarity from South Africa. I want to recognize the Minister of Cooperation and International Issue who visited us in the camps, and also the minister and for presidency and the representative of UN Women, and also all the representatives from the civil society and from the action plan for peace of South Africa, which is not action plan for South Africa. It's for all of us as women who are suffering from the war, from the violation of human rights, and from the crisis from the pandemic and from all the problems. The situation of Western Sahara has been very complicated for more than 46 years due to the illegal occupation by Morocco to Western Sahara. Western Sahara is the last colony of Africa. As well now, more than 200,000 families have fled from the bombardment with napalm and phosphorus, leaving relatives in the occupied areas. And today, they continue to live in refugee camps in the southwest of Algeria since 1975, in a very difficult conditions. After 16 years of waiting, Morocco proposed a referendum in 1991 under the United Nations and with the support of African Union, a process that lasted more than 29 years without fulfilling the promise that was given to the Sahrawi. On November 13, 2020, Morocco has broken the ceasefire by attacking a group of civilians who were demonstrating to ask for the self-determination of the Sahrawi people. The Front Polisario announced the return to arms to defend the right of the self-determination of the Sahrawi people. We have been, sorry,
Minister, we're struggling to hear you.
Sorry for that. As I said, the Polisario Front has announced a return to the arm to defend our right of self-determination. So now we have been living newly in a terrible war for more than 1 year. Military drones are killing daily. Many people has died, entire family, women, children, and elderly people. In the occupied zone of Western Sahara, the Sahrawi are being subjected to human rights violation. Especially women are imprisoned, separated from their children, raped in front of their fathers and husbands. And sadly, all this is happening in a total silence. There is an incredible blackout about that, what is happening in West Sahara. The mission of the United Nations, which is called MINURSO, is the only mission in the world which doesn't have the right to monitor the human rights in Western Sahara. They cannot protect the people. They cannot protect the civilians. They cannot do anything to protect people. So they are really they're not doing anything in favor to protect the civilians. So from this platform, I would like to call especially women of South Africa. South Africa as a country which is committed in supporting the people who are especially the Sahrawi people. South Africa for us is our hope. The movement in South Africa, which could celebrate the liberty, the liberation of South Africa is our hope. So we would like to extend this relation between Sahrawi, especially Sahrawi women and South Africans women to work closely and sensitize about this plan, this action plan for peace, because we need to learn from their experience, especially now we are in this peace process. We need to improve our participation in this peace process as women. So it's very important for us to have or to learn about this experience. So I'm calling really to extend our willing to participate in all the activities that you are working on to improve our participation, especially in our peace process. I thank you very much for this invitation and congratulate you for this initiative, for this important action plan for peace, which is very important for all of us as Africans, but also as women in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Hassan. Can I just call on everybody online to please mute their mics? Noting that our lab is for all women. Know that South African women are with all women in conflict, that your struggle is our struggle, and our struggles are your struggle. That is what we mean by solidarity. And then noting that the ceasefire has been broken and calling for us to have more exchanges, to extend our relations with the women of Sahrawi and to assist in getting more women to participate in peace processes. Many thanks. I am now going to call on Egna Siduma of Joram Chisano University, who has been working extensively on women and the gendered impacts of violent extremism. I hope you are still online, Ms. Dr. Siduma. Is she there? Good. Dr. Siduma, are you still online? I know that she indicated she had a meeting. Yeah. No? Not yet? Okay. Can we then call on Juliet Will of the Women's International Peace Center, who's going to speak to us on South Sudan. She's the Deputy Executive Director. Juliet, you have the floor. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Professor Cheryl, Your Excellencies, ministers, women leaders, the academia, colleagues in the civil society. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to join you this afternoon as we reflect on this key important topic and the role it plays on peace and security, gender equality for women and girls in Africa. South Sudan has been ridden by conflict since the 1950s. So when we are talking about the context of South Sudan, they've been in conflict for over 50 years. And in this period, several developments have happened. There have been a lot of organizing to ensure that peace and security is restored. In the year 2005, the Comprehensive Peace Agreement was signed. And this brought a ray of hope that led to the formation of the new state, South Sudan, in the year 2011. And we need to recognize the key role that women played in this process, in mobilizing women to be able to elect, to be able to participate, to be able to take up leadership. And we are glad that women were able to come out in numbers and vote for secession and thereafter declaration of the South Sudan as an independent state. However, 2 years after that, 2013, another conflict re-emerged. And this, in a way, washed down some of the achievements that had been made. To date, we continue to see a semblance of peace because there are a number of attacks, militarization is still ongoing, and this is the context that we are talking about. For South Sudan is seemingly at peace, but not at peace in actual sense. So what is the impact to women and girls and the entire community? One of the biggest impact is that around education. We notice that to date, South Sudan has the lowest literacy rate, 27%, when you look at sub-Saharan Africa. And with approximately 2.8 million of out-of-school children. These are both girls and boys. We also notice that 70% of the population above the age of 15 are illiterate. And the majority of these are women and girls. We all know that education plays a key role in enhancing gender equality, development, and economic prosperity, but also in ensuring that peace and security is restored in our community. The other key issue is around health. The big timeline that the country has been in conflict has resulted into poor health systems and infrastructure, there are few hospitals, few professional health workers, and access to quality of care is very difficult for women and girls. We thus see that the maternal mortality rate in South Sudan is one of the highest in the world, with approximately 789 deaths amongst 100,000 births. So the issue of health continues to be a big challenge. Access to sexual and reproductive health for women is challenging. Access to information is challenging because of the poor infrastructure and systems. We also notice a high burden of mental health and trauma because of the long, prolonged war, the lack of mental health professionals, but also the lack of facilities, the lack of professionals that could be able to provide this support. And with a community that is deeply traumatized, it means that the governance systems, the military systems, the health systems, the wellness, the entire wellness of women and girls and the community is affected and deprived. And this is manifested in some of the atrocities that we continue to observe during this space. When we look at civic organizing, many women groups have been formed to bring peace, to support other women, to ensure that livelihood continues. However, we observe that most of the women groups are poorly resourced and continue to struggle on their own with no external support. We also have noticed that the political systems has enforced a lot of restrictions that limit women's convening and organizing, but also being able to speak out and position the issues that they would like to contribute to the governance and development of the institutions and their well-being. The other key impact has been around displacement. We've seen majority of South Sudan communities moving to neighboring countries, Uganda, Democratic Republic of Congo, Kenya, somewhere in South Africa and other communities. And currently, Uganda hosts an approximately 1 million South Sudan refugees, and 80% of these are women and girls who are living in refugee settlements, struggling to make a livelihood, struggling to send their children to school, struggling to be civilians and organize as actors in these spaces. So displacement has been a key impediment to the wellness, to the rebuilding of the peaceful communities and the work that would like women to engage in. We have seen women's roles to ensure that the relations between the refugees and host communities are managed and that they continue living together as true sisters and brothers in these spaces. The other key issue is around respect for women's rights. When we look at the context of South Sudan, with the deep-rooted cultural practices that deprive women's full enjoyment of their rights, the high levels of patriarchy, it does not allow women to thrive, to take up leadership, to go to school. So these practices are continuing to make it difficult for women to play a key role and ensure that their agency is actualized. We therefore observe and report several forms of gender-based violence, sexual violence, child marriage, and deprive of girls of access to school. And this all have an impact on peace and security and our achievement of gender equality.
Juliet, I'm going to have to ask you to draw to a close. We're running seriously out of time. So 1 minute to close, please.
And finally, the issue of poverty, the high levels of poverty that are impacting on livelihoods. Women are mainly engaged in informal, small-scale businesses, and yet they continue to carry the highest burden of catering for families and communities. We notice that the land where women are supposed to engage in agriculture, some of them are still cluttered with the mines that had never been removed, and this deprives continued engagement in livelihoods. Access to justice is still a dream because the system is only within the urban center. There are no special spaces for women to present their issues. We don't have enough legal support to represent women and ensure that they access justice. However, amidst all this, we want to celebrate the women of South Sudan for their strength, for their resilience, and for their leadership. And for this, we see that in 2015-2016, when the revitalized agreement on resolution of conflict in South Sudan was enacted, they ensured that a 35% quota was embedded into the agreement so that the principle of human rights is mainstreamed and that women are able to participate in leadership at all levels. We also celebrate the fact that we were able to design the first South Sudan National Action Plan in 2011, though it was interrupted with conflicts, but is a framework that has been in place and being utilized to engage and ensure that participation is appreciated. Currently, South Sudan is in the constitution-making process, and women are striving to ensure that the principle of equality, the principle of rights, the principle of participation is at the center of the constitution-making process. So the women of South Sudan call upon all of us to be in solidarity, to support them as they enact a new constitution, to support them as they institute their new parliament, to support them to be proactive in the civic organizing, and that their voice is continuously amplified for peace and security in Africa and the world. I thank you for this space, for God and my country.
Many thanks, Juliet, and thank you to the Women's International Peace Center, who has been working for years in South Sudan, in Uganda, and in the DRC in order for women to participate more in peace processes. Noting here that South Sudan is seemingly at peace, but there is no peace in the country. And then calling on us to support them as they try to implement the new constitution, the new parliament, and to have their own voices heard in the country and to participate more in those peace processes taking place. Thank you very much. I'm now going to call on Madame Florence Boloka, a gender expert whom we all know from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Florence, only 5 minutes, please. Karen Florence sent us her presentation. Thanks. Madame Boloka, are you with us? No? Florence? Ah, there you are. Thank you.
Are you hearing me? Are we together?
We are not together, Madame Boloka.
Okay, thank you very much, Cheryl. Good morning. And I'm going to speak on the impact of conflict on women in DR Congo, in DRC. Thank you very much for inviting me in this meeting, but take your microphone because I'm going to speak in French.
There's no translation in Florence. There's no translation, so you're going to have to speak in English, my dear. Sorry.
I'm going to speak in English. Oh, really? But what you have to do is to hear from me and don't laugh on my English because I know that there is no translators. Are we together? Are you hearing me? Okay, thank you very much. Since 3 decades, the Great Lake region in general and specifically DRC is in conflict. And there is insecurity, instability, and many problems. And women and girls are facing many challenges. And this war in Eastern Congo, in eastern part of the Congo, got an impact, a great impact on the Great Lake region, the Great Lake region in general. All countries of Great Lakes region got the impact of conflict in Eastern Congo. And women and the children, young girls, are the main victims of all these countries in DR Congo. If women and girls are the main victims of these conflict in Eastern Congo. But for now, we know that in the particular context of COVID-19, it remains still problem in the country and in the world about the impact of conflict. And this security situation affects the world and also all the countries in the world. It is evident that wars that do not resolve problems. But what we are living is that there is many problems, and the men who are facing all these problems are women, especially in my country, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The Democratic Republic of the Congo is an example of this conflict. During 2 or 3 decades, we are in conflict, and there can't be development in this kind of problem. And it is why we are facing many challenges, and we are with women to encourage them to try to do something, because they have to struggle for their life, for the life of the families, and women are the main victims of this conflict because they have husbands, brothers, uncles, and many members of the family who are, and they are affected by everything in this conflict. And women and girls are the rights are they don't have rights because they are facing rape, they are facing many challenges, they are slaves, and they are facing many problems. And these conflicts are also the opportunity for perpetrators to get many problems and to try to face these challenges. It is why women in DRC are together, and we are together, we are trying to use the 1325 resolution of the the United Nations to put in place and try to get it on for our efforts to go out the conflict. And armed conflict in Eastern Congo affected negatively the development of the DRC, but also of all the country. And after this conflict, we have to reconstruct the country, but it is not yet possible, and we are there, we are still on, and people are affected by this conflict. And the environment also is affected by the conflict. Soil, water, and air are affected. And there is no, we can't speak freely. We have to, we are worried and we can't say anything about the country. And in front of this situation, it is important that population in general have to prevent, to restore peace, and to consolidate and promote to promote peace in conflict, armed conflict areas. And the eradication of this challenge is that we have to put in place strategies to try to see and to put in place all our efforts to see how to go out of this by advocacy, by many lobbying we are doing to the decision-making level to get the, and also we are putting in, we are mainstreaming the 1325 United Nations Council resolution to what we are doing on the field with the work on to try to go out conflict in DRC. And we have
to ask you, Madam Florence, to please draw to a close. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, let me close by saying that I say thank you very much, Cheryl, for involving me. But I didn't know that I have to speak in English, or otherwise I had to translate my presentation in English. But I can send you an English presentation shortly after this meeting. Thank you for involving us in this meeting. Thank you very much.
My apologies, Madam Florence. I should have told you that there's no translation. Your English is very good still, and I think that everybody has been able to hear you. We have your presentation, and we will circulate the presentation as well. Thank you once again for continuing to highlight the suffering of women in the DRC, particularly in the east of the DRC, how you are now also indicating that women's rights are being infringed, that women cannot speak freely, for example, as well, and highlighting your implementing Resolution 1325, the advocacy and the lobbying taking place. South African women have been assisting women in the DRC in the past. We note Salweed and Alphaweed and Accord and ISIS and many other organizations, but I think we can be doing much more now. We tend to move from conflict to conflict and not sustain our interests, and DRC still needs us at this moment. So you have our solidarity. That's me recommitting us as South African women to solidarity, to continued solidarity with the DRC. We now call on Meseret Kazigna, who is of the Ethiopian Network of Women's Associations. Many thanks for being here with us today. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon for those of us in the Eastern Africa. All protocol observed. Thank you very much for the chance and for the opportunity to speak in this Solidarity Conference. My name is Meseret. I'm a program manager for the Network of Ethiopian Women Association. So I'm speaking on the impact of conflict and the role of women rights organizations here in Ethiopia. Since November 2020, when the escalating the tension between the federal government and the Tigray regional government, it's reaching the peak and lead to an armed conflict on the 4th of November 2020. Since the outbreak of the war between Ethiopian National Defense Force and Tigray Defense Force in November 2020, women have been disproportionately affected by the ongoing conflict in the northern region of Ethiopia. Women and girls are particularly vulnerable to sexual violence and other gender-based violence and discrimination in the course of the conflict and internal displacement. Women and girls are also subjected to various forms of sexual violence, including rape, gang rape, sexual slavery, and forced pregnancy in the course of conflict and internal displacement. The joint investigation by the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission recently and also there is another report recently independently done by Ethiopian Human Rights Commission has found that all parties to the conflict committed sexual and gender-based violence. What are the challenges of women in a conflict are facing till this day is internal displacement. The number of internal displaced people are more than 4.2 million people, and women are facing a challenge on sexual violence, physical violence, emotional and psychological violence, and also economic violence, including unpaid care, the burden of care work, which is unpaid care work. What are the roles of women rights organizations in the response to the conflict is, since the outbreak of the war, the women rights organizations here in Ethiopia are calling all the parties to settle and to ceasefire and to settle the conflict and to by peace talk. So including the organization I'm representing, more than 25 women rights organizations here in Ethiopia had a press release and a joint call for peace in different times. Call on all actors involved for immediate halt of violence, confrontation, de-escalation, and peaceful resolution of the situation, and play their role in preventing violence, upholding the rule of law, and protection of civilians during conflict and state of emergency. And also the women rights organization also has a call for urgent humanitarian assistance, redress the prosecution of protection of human rights, women rights, and searching for a durable conflict resolution in the area affected by repeated attack of various motivation. Also, the women rights organization call upon international and local humanitarian aid providers to develop a necessary consultation and direction with civil society organizations and other relevant stakeholders. Also, this women rights organization advocate for women rights organization representation on the humanitarian response and representation of the local women rights organizations in all UN humanitarian clusters. Also, on the response to the conflict and to the women affected by the conflict, women rights organization has respond humanitarian or emergency response, trauma debriefing for conflict-related HGBV survivors, rehabilitating women rights organizations in the conflict-affected areas, contribute to tackling impunity for sexual violence and discrimination occurring in the context of conflict and displacement through advocacy, human rights education, and research. And the women rights organizations also produce a guideline to address the SGBV in the conflict areas in the internal displaced people camps, and also creating a referral linkage between the hospitals, healthcare centers, the women rights organizations, so that the SGBV survivors will get treatment and special attention. What are the opportunities so far we have seen is there is a newly established National Dialogue Commission, which is a hope for all of us here in Ethiopia. So we are aiming and finger crossed for a peace talk and a national dialogue towards peace building. And we also, I think we are the only one in the Eastern Africa that we don't have a NAP so far. So there is also a discussion on the draft NAP 1325. And the other opportunity we have on hand is a coordination effort, which is a coordination, creating a platform for humanitarian organizations and the women rights, the local women rights organizations in Ethiopia. And the other opportunity we have is local human rights organizations has now a representation on UN humanitarian clusters. And other opportunity that we have is relatively independent human rights commission, since the reform of the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, now reports have come out and still not 100% covered the SGBV, but these reforms in the independence of human rights commission. Now, am I hearing my voice again?
Yeah. We hear you, Nazareth, but you're going to have to also draw to a close now, please.
Yes, I'm almost there. And our other opportunity that we have on hand is the ratification of the African Convention for Protection and Assistance of IDPs in Africa, the Kampala Convention. And what are the challenges that we're facing to support the women in conflict is underreported cases of SGBV, since rape cases are usually underreported due to stigma and fear and retaliation. The actual number of cases likely to be significantly higher than the finding of the investigation both by UN Human Rights and Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. And there is no specific law to respond to the need of women in IDP center. That's also another challenge. Provision of service to victims and SGBV survivors, including shelter, is also the challenge that we are facing. Yes, and hostile and polarized political environment is also one of the big challenge that the civil societies are facing here in Ethiopia. And also there is not enough women rights organizations represented on the human rights, the humanitarian response, and on the UN humanitarian clusters. And as I tried to mention earlier, we are hoping for a national dialogue to start very soon, but women are not well represented in the National Dialogue Commission too. On the way forward, like multi-sectoral approach in a vital effort to deal the conflict-related displacement crisis, especially towards SGBV victims, ensuring women rights representations in all platforms and women rights. So I think I'm done here. Women in Ethiopia call upon the women in this conference in solidarity to peace building, and I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nazareth. Noting that the political environment is really not conducive for civil society and women's rights organizations to do their work properly, calling on all parties to have ceasefire for the peaceful resolution of disputes, for the rule of law, for humanitarian assistance, and for access to health care in particular. And then noting that there's going to be a national dialogue and women need to be participating in that. I just want to check before we close this session that Egna Sidumo is not online. Egna, have you joined us or not? I don't want to close if you are there. No? Okay. Let me then thank our panelists, all our panelists in 3 different sessions, those who made the opening remarks, those who spoke to the NAP, and those who spoke about the impact of conflicts in their particular countries. There's never enough time in a session like this. One day is not sufficient, and certainly not one morning. We need a whole week if we are truly to grapple with the situation. And at some point, we need to see how we can get sufficient resources to actually do this in more meaningful ways. But I take away from this particular session the trauma that women are going through and men are going through, the lack of dignity during conflicts, the impoverishment, the displacement, the violence and the fear that punctuates those societies, the displacement. But also when I listen to what women are doing, the continued activism, the continued struggle, and the need for us then to also continue supporting all women in all conflict contexts. So thank you very much. It's been a long morning. We are running seriously out of time, so I'm going to ask us to simply have a 10-minute health break and come back for a very important session where we begin to discuss how we can more concretely support women in conflict areas. Thank you.